learn more about projects on the Green Mountain National Forest. As I mentioned before, this meeting is being recorded. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Respect everyone's time and start promptly. My name is Sean Langston. I work for the Green Mountain National Forest. I'm the project team leader for the Telephone Gap Integrated Resource Project. I've been working on the forest for about 2 years now. I'll be facilitating our presentation to discuss the Telephone Gap Integrated Resource Project. Before we really get started, I do want to go over a few virtual meeting best practices. Many of you are probably already aware of these, but if not, it's always a good review. Please keep your microphone on mute and your camera turned off, unless you're asked to do otherwise. You should see, if it's off, you should see the little slash mark running through the camera and the mic as pictured there. Keep questions and conversations focused, constructive, and respectful. You do have access to the chat function, and I'll get to that on the next slide. But please keep those focused and respectful. Goes without saying that any offensive behavior will have you removed from the meeting. Also, this is our first public meeting using this format. We've been meeting via Teams internally for about 1.5 years now, so we're pretty comfortable with it, but this is the first time we've done this on a public forum like this. So please be patient with us as we work through these if anything unexpected arises. As I mentioned, you have access to the chat function. So if you have questions on anything you hear during the presentation, please use this chat dialog to ask those questions. If you're using a laptop, usually the chat is on the right side, and at the bottom you'll see an area to type your message, and it says type in your message as shown there. If you're on a mobile phone, you may have to tap on the small speech bubble at the top with the 2 lines on it, and from there you can get into the chat function. And as I mentioned, we're here to talk about the Telephone Gap Integrated Resource Project. Our objectives for tonight, pretty simple. We're here to inform you, the public, about this upcoming project. It's something we've been working on internally for 2 to 3 years, conducting inventory. This is our chance to present the project for the first time to the public. We will have a question and answer session after our presentation, so any questions you have will be answered then. Their objective is to coordinate follow-up meetings and future collaboration over the next few months. Our agenda tonight, we'll start with some opening remarks from our district ranger, Chris Matrick. After that, I will present a short presentation with a project area overview, where the boundary of this project is, and the breakdown of the lands within it, and share some simple maps. After that, we'll move into a series of presentations from our resource specialists on various topics such as ecological diversity, timber, wildlife, botany, recreation. After that, I will present some short information on how to sign up for some follow-up meetings and field trips that we've scheduled. And then after that, we will move into our question and answer session and then wrap things up. As you may be aware, we are scheduled to go as late as 9 p.m. tonight, but depending on the interaction and the volume of questions, we may end a little early. So with that, I will hand things over to our district ranger, Chris Matrick, who has some opening remarks.
And I'm off to a good start because I've remembered to turn my mute button off. So, well, welcome everybody. I'm really happy that you could join us tonight to learn a little bit more about the Telephone Gap Project. My name is Chris Matrick. I'm the District Ranger on the Rochester and Middlebury Ranger District. I've been in this position since 2012. This is my second round of an integrated resource project. I was also the District Ranger for the Robinson Integrated Resource Project that took place in Chittenden, Rochester, and Hancock, Stockbridge, Pittsfield. My role on this project is the responsible official, and what that means is that I get to determine the level of analysis that we undertake for the project. I ensure that the project is in line with law, regulation, policy, and then I ultimately decide what actions are going to move forward for further analysis, and I get the honor of signing the decision at the end and making sure that any mitigation measures or design features are implemented as they're described in our environmental analysis. And I also get to engage with you, the public, about the project and listen to your ideas and feedback on the project. It's a task that I enjoy, and I'm really excited to be here with you as we kick it off. To me, this is arguably the most important phase of this type of project, and it's certainly my favorite phase, getting the opportunity to share some of our thoughts and ideas on potential projects and actions, and then harvesting your reactions and your own ideas and your own thoughts on how best to implement this project. This is one of many opportunities that you're going to have to engage with the Green Mountain National Forest resource staff. There are multiple resource-specific follow-up meetings that are going to be held and field trips that are going to be planned into the summer and fall, and you'll hear a little bit about those later. The one thing that makes me a little bit sad about the meeting tonight is that we're not meeting face-to-face. When we had to make the call on the date of the meeting, we were still a little bit up in the air about whether we wanted to meet face-to-face or whether we wanted to try a virtual format. And we're all kind of used to virtual now, although I question as to whether we're good at it. We'll find out. But we're used to it. But we've typically met face-to-face for these meetings, and I really enjoy that interaction, kind of huddled around a map, looking at it and talking, and we just didn't feel comfortable at this point. But as the summer moves on, we'll get that opportunity on the field trips that we have planned. I'm going to turn it over back to Sean in just a few moments, but I wanted to quickly give you a bit of information on where we stand today and what the staff has been up to that's been working on the project. Sean's going to go into a bit more detail on some of the things that I'm going to touch on, so I'm going to kind of breeze past a few things. So all the actions that take place on a national forest are guided by that National Forest Land and Resource Management Plan. You'll hear us refer to it as the Forest Plan. If you're not familiar with it, it's very similar to a town plan or a zoning document, and it sets forth goals and objectives for the forest to work on, typically over a 15 to 20-year period. Integrated resource projects are one of the main ways that we implement that forest plan. These projects are typically at a landscape scale and focused on a single watershed. Telephone Gap is unique because it encompasses two watersheds, both some of the Otter Creek watershed and also the Tweed watershed. Actually, it's three watersheds and a little bit of the Ottaquechee watershed. So there's multiple watersheds involved here. And it's because why we went into the more than one watershed is it just the land base of each individual watershed wasn't of the size we were looking for. Because remember, we're looking for landscape scale activities here. In integrated resource projects, staff from all of our resource areas work together to plan and implement projects in a cooperative and collaborative manner. They work together to achieve positive outcomes for multiple resource areas. Over the past 2 years, we've been engaged in the inventory and assessment phase of the project. The resource specialists have been studying existing data sets and information and conducting field inventories. And Sean's going to delve a bit more into this in just a moment. All this information has been compiled into the landscape assessment, which is now available on the project website. In this document, the specialists have displayed the existing condition for their resource, what's out there on the ground right now. And then they refer back to the forest plan and reflect on how could the Telephone Gap project move this portion of the national forest towards what's called the desired future condition, or the DFC, in the forest plan. So the question is, how can Telephone Gap project help us fulfill some of the goals and objectives that are set forth in our forest plan? And the specialists also will identify some potential activities that may help close the gap between the existing and the desired future condition. I just want to point out that all these activities are could do activities at this point. They're not will do. We're way too early in the process to have fully developed proposed activities. And this is really where you come in. We need your help in deciding what ideas should be moved forward into potential actions, and we need your ideas for what you would like to see undertaken on this landscape. So you're going to hear a lot from resource specialists tonight and a little bit more from Sean, but you've heard enough from me right now, although I could go on and on and on, because as I mentioned, this is my favorite part of the project. But I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks very much for your time tonight. I really appreciate you joining us. Back to you, Sean.
Thank you, Chris. Second, while I get my presentation back up. Okay, Chris covered some of this ground, but I'll kind of go over it again here real quick. So what is an integrated resource project? It's one of the main Forest Service strategies for achieving goals, objectives, and desired future conditions outlined in the Green Mountain National Forest Land and Resource Management Plan, or as we call it, the Forest Plan for short. Also, all projects on the forest must comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, which has the dual purposes of both assessing environmental impacts of projects and providing an avenue for public review. As Chris mentioned, IRPs are our way to look at a landscape level area and conduct projects. We do also complete many smaller projects in the forest, but these IRPs are really set up for larger landscapes to really take a look at some of the maybe bigger vegetation management direction from the forest plan. So when we refer to the forest plan, it's our guiding document. It tells us what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And all projects that we propose must be in compliance with the plan. Our current forest plan has been in place since 2006. And for context, we have completed 6 IRPs previous to Telephone Gap. And by complete, I mean the NEPA process and the decision has been completed. A few of those IRPs we're still actually implementing projects from on the ground. If you're interested in finding out more information from our plan, please refer to the website, which was included in the chat function. You can also reach it at the website listed there, or you can just Google Green Mountain National Forest Plan, and you could probably find it there. So forest plan direction. When we talk about forest plan direction, we're really talking about specific goals and objectives listed in the plan. Also the desired future conditions. Those things sort of outline what we would like the forest to look like ecologically and for other resources too, such as recreation sites and things. The plan also includes standards and guidelines, which are the best way to think of those are like they're protective measures a lot of times to protect resources. For instance, wetlands. We apply like a no disturbance buffer within 100 feet, I believe, of wetlands, so to protect that resource. And those standards and guidelines sort of apply to every project. Another big component of the forest plan are what we call management areas. Our 2006 plan has designated 17 total management areas. As Chris mentioned, these are similar to town zoning areas. They direct what is or isn't allowed or emphasized within each area. And each management area within the plan will have its own set of goals, objectives, and desired future conditions, as well as standards and guidelines. The management options, or the range of activities that we can conduct on within management areas sort of range from diverse forest use, which is sort of the least restrictive of the management areas, all the way, to things such as wilderness areas, which are the most restrictive, where we're really limited on anything we can do there. So this map here shows sort of the breakdown of the management areas on the north half of the Green Mountain National Forest, with the telephone gap area down there at the bottom in the white outline. Again, our plan has sections devoted to each management area, discussing what should be emphasized, the desired future conditions, goals and objectives, and all that. The second key point for an integrated resource project is it consists of the planning, implementation, and monitoring of multiple resource project activities. These can include timber management, wildlife habitat improvement, stream and soil restoration, increased recreation opportunities, road improvements, and protections for rare plants, heritage sites, and threatened and endangered species. These are generally interrelated in their geographical location, their scope, and intended purpose. As Chris mentioned too, that that's that landscape component. We're trying to look at an entire watershed, or in this case, parts of 3 watersheds. And the third major component of integrated resource projects is that we try to develop them with robust public collaboration that builds trust and creates partnerships. That is part of this meeting sort of kicks off that process. This is not the only chance you'll have to provide your input. This is just sort of the kickoff. We just published the landscape assessment on Monday, along with several companion maps. So we realize people have not had the chance to really probably dive into that. Not to worry, we will have further opportunities to engage and to collaborate, starting with a series of follow-up meetings and field trips. And I'll get to that later in the night. we'll have a specific sign-up sheet for you to attend some of those meetings. And even outside of those meetings, we'll have our contact info. You can always reach out to us with any of your concerns or ideas. So getting more specific to the telephone gap area, the project area is located, as you can see on the map of Vermont there, just to the northeast of Rutland. It largely occurs within Rutland County, small parts of Addison and Windsor County. Primarily within the towns of Chittenden, Pittsfield, Killington, and Minden, but also small portions of Goshen, Stockbridge, Rutland Town, Pittsford, and Brandon. This is just another map zoomed in to the project area, sort of simplified to Forest Service land in green and the non-Forest Service land in black, with the town boundaries located there. This map, getting back to the management areas I mentioned before, it's a little busy, might be hard to see on the presentation, but this map is available on the project website. It's the overview map. It's a little helpful that it shows a lot of the roads, and it also has the management areas included in there. You might notice the boundary for what we're calling the project area in the purple line includes a lot of non-Forest Service land. We'll discuss that in a minute. But the boundary, like Chris said, those usually follow the watershed boundaries, which tend to be high ridges and peaks. With this particular project area, we did use Highway 4 for a long section of the southern boundary. So management areas within the project area, about roughly half of the area is considered diverse backcountry. Diverse forest use makes up another big portion. And as you can see, the other management areas there and their breakdown. Also included within the project area are a little over 1,500 acres of eligible wild and scenic river corridor. It's not, I didn't include it on the table because those acres do overlap with these management areas, so I didn't want to confuse people with the numbers not adding up to the grand total there of 32,252. And then here's another table showing how the project area breaks down by town. As I mentioned, Chittenden has the largest amount of area with 58% of the total area, 24,000 of the 32,000 Forest Service acres within the town of Chittenden. And a few towns there, such as Brandon, Pittsford, Rutland Town, actually have 0 Forest Service acres within them. So with that, you might be wondering, why include all of the private land or non-Forest Service land within your project area? Well, one of the reasons is we're hoping that willing landowners can consider developing management activities for their own land that may benefit them and complement management on national forest lands. Part of that will be discussed at a landowner workshop this fall. We're still working on the details of when that will occur. At this landowner workshop, there will be information, possible assistance, and even including maybe potential funding sources from a variety of federal and state agencies and non-government organizations such as the National Wild Turkey Federation. There will be presentations at the meeting, and you can discuss, managing your private lands for whatever goals you might have at that meeting. We will send out an announcement when we get the details set. We have a mailing list of landowners in the project area that we'll be using for that. So why did we invite you here tonight? As mentioned, this is to initiate the public input process, which will help the Forest Service develop proposed activities on national forest land in the project area. As we said, this is just the start of that process, which we expect to take a few months as we move forward. And there will be many more opportunities to contribute to that. And we want to hear from you to help us develop management activities on these lands, either your ideas for potential actions, activities, projects that you might want to see on these lands, any concerns you might have on the landscape, either with some of the potential actions we may take or things you've noticed out there, wandering on the forest, and also your knowledge of the land. We realize many of you, have intimate knowledge of the land, having lived here for many years. So we'd like to hear that. We have inventoried the area over the last 2 years with our employees, but it's really sort of impossible to cover every inch of ground. So any information you can provide would be helpful. So what have we done so far? So most of our work has been internal. Over the last couple of years, we've collected information and conducted resource inventories, some starting in 2018 with some contract common stand exams for timber resources. And from that, we have published the landscape assessment, which has defined the existing condition across the project area, and also defined, using the forest plan and some other resources, the desired future condition of these resources across the landscape. And from there, we've developed a list of potential activities to bridge this difference between the existing and the desired condition. And we do want to reiterate, at this point, no decisions have been made to include any decisions on what to include in the proposed action. So you will see in presentations a little later, and also in the landscape, you might see lists of potential or possible activities. We just want to make it clear that those are not what we would refer to as proposed actions. They're still preliminary at this point. And as mentioned, the landscape assessment is available now on the project website. It contains much more detail than what we'll go over tonight, so I encourage everyone to go into that and read through it. There are also several companion maps related to the resource sections in there, also available on the project website. Some of those are pretty detailed, so there's a lot to go over. Okay, and with that, we'll stop sharing my screen. And we'll move on to the portion of the presentation, which will hopefully be a lot more interesting, and that is a series of resource specialist presentations where we will discuss the various resources. We'll start off by hearing from Suzanne Gifford on ecological diversity. So Suzanne, if you're ready, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Suzanne Gifford. I'm the ecologist and wildlife biologist for Green Mountain and Finger Lakes National Forests. I will be presenting on ecological diversity. Ecological diversity includes broadly current forest composition and age class in comparison with ecological tendencies, and at a fine scale, ecologically rare or unique features. I'll also be addressing wetland habitat potential. We conducted a habitat management unit analysis comparing existing vegetation to potential natural vegetation based on ecological land types. This table is a pared down version of the one published in the full text landscape assessment. The key takeaway is that the landscape is dominated by northern hardwood, 76% of U.S. Forest Service lands within the IRP, whereas a much greater proportion of mixedwood and softwood habitat types is expected. The discrepancy is due to the history of land use, clearing for agriculture, and subsequent ecological succession following abandonment. The table differentiates between all U.S. Forest Service lands in the IRP and suitable lands, a term we use to describe forest land that is managed for timber production on a regulated basis. Lands may be unsuitable for harvest or management due to forest or congressional designations, such as ecological special areas or congressionally designated wilderness areas, or due to resource concerns predicting damage from harvest activities such as steep slopes or shallow soils. 66% of U.S. Forest Service lands on Telephone Gap IRP are within the suitable land base. Approximately 60% of lands across Green Mountain National Forest are considered suitable. As expected, this difference between existing vegetation and potential natural vegetation is even more pronounced when we look at only Forest Service lands suitable for management, because in many cases, these are the same, more accessible lands that were utilized more heavily in the past. So while those composition objectives apply to suitable lands in even or uneven aged conditions, age class objectives laid out in the forest plan are only applied to suitable lands in an even aged condition, a smaller subset, about 22% by this calculation, of the project area. These stands lack structural complexity due to the types of management applied in the past. Through management, we seek to balance age classes as a means of supporting habitat diversity, sustainability of the resource, and building resilience. Age classes are divided by habitat type, since tree species and natural communities mature at different rates. So again, please refer to the landscape assessment document for the full version of this table. When splitting these habitat types out in the Telephone Gap IRP, the mature age class is currently overrepresented with respect to the forest plan objectives, while the amount of young forest is below our objectives and the regenerating age class is missing from this project area. Again, these objectives apply to suitable, even-aged stands only. So it bears emphasis that the old class is in reference to silvicultural rotation timeframes. These are not ecologically old forests and do not display old growth characteristics. For example, the threshold for the northern hardwood forest type old age class is 120 years, whereas this habitat type won't start showing old growth characteristics until at least 170 to 200 years old or older. Again, these stands are in an even-aged management condition, which lacks the structural complexity characteristics of ecologically old forests. At the fine scale, we consider the ecologically rare and unique areas. Calcium enrichment from bedrock has contributed to this being a particularly unique and biodiverse area. There are 3 federally designated ecologically special areas within the project area. The Cape Research Natural Area is a high-quality, mature, and old-growth enriched northern hardwood and red spruce yellow birch forest. Blue Ridge Fen is a high-quality intermediate to rich fen wetland community at high elevation surrounded by late successional forests. The site is currently designated as a candidate research natural area, as documented in the 2006 Forest Plan. An updated and detailed establishment record and administrative review and approvals are needed to complete and finalize designation as a research natural area. Some documentation for an establishment record was completed in the 1980s. And the third one, North Pond, sits at approximately 2,500 feet elevation and is surrounded by very undisturbed old montane spruce fir forest, a cold air talus woodland, and some calcareous seepage. Trees are large diameter and well over 200 and 300 years old. And again, these are areas with special protection per our forest plan. In addition, the state of Vermont Agency of Natural Resources has recently identified more than 30 state significant communities of 17 community types, which our botanist will be describing in more detail later on. Finally, we have preliminarily delineated areas of late successional, structurally complex forests, which are predominantly on unsuitable portions of the IRP. In contrast to the old age class for silvicultural rotation on even age stands, these areas of forest are possibly many times older and have begun to acquire some old growth characteristics. However, inventory is incomplete at this time. And last, considering our wetland habitats. Wetlands and wet meadows are tremendously valuable for plant and wildlife habitat, water storage, flood attenuation, and carbon sequestration. More than 2/3 of the threatened, endangered, or sensitive wildlife species on Green Mountain National Forest and many of our sensitive plant species would benefit from the wetlands and wet meadows, the habitats that beavers create and maintain. Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department estimates loss of half of all wetlands in Vermont compared with the historical condition. Beaver, a keystone species for creating and maintaining wetland and meadow complexes, was extirpated from this area for the fur trade more than 100 years prior to European settlement. In that 100 years, habitats had changed dramatically when European settlement occurred primarily in valley bottoms and along streams in areas beaver had previously occupied. In the 1920s and 30s, beavers were reintroduced to Vermont from populations in Maine and New York State. However, beavers may face dispersal hurdles in populating higher elevation habitat pockets, including those in portions of the Telephone Gap IRP. So looking ahead to opportunities, silvicultural treatments have the potential to move portions of the project area incrementally closer to the composition objectives laid out in the forest plan. Some highlights include that a strong softwood and mixedwood understories present opportunities to increase these habitat types on the landscape closer to the forest plan objectives and more in line with predicted site-specific ecological tendencies. We can also prioritize retaining existing softwoods, particularly in cool pockets where they are most likely to be resilient to changing climate. Oak is currently a small but ecologically important component of the landscape. Stands with a strong mature oak component present opportunities for management, including by prescribed burning or mid-story removals to encourage a regenerating cohort of oak. Regeneration harvesting presents opportunities to promote aspen, birch, and other early successional species to further diversify the forest landscape. On suitable even-age stands, we have the opportunity to use silvicultural treatments to move portions of the project area incrementally closer to the age class objectives laid out in the forest plan, including establishing a regenerating age class and early successional habitat from which so many species of wildlife benefit. And harvest of suitable even-age stands reaching older silvicultural rotation ages presents the opportunity to diversify these areas and increases management options in the future. We see an opportunity to document the high quality late successional forest areas for their old growth characteristics and consider alternative designations if appropriate. Our focus on this portion of the forest highlights the opportunity to complete inventory, documentation, and administrative reviews to finalize research natural area status for the Blue Ridge Fen, which is currently a candidate research natural area. And finally, we see an opportunity to conduct beaver restoration assessment tool modeling to evaluate this landscape for opportunities to improve habitat for beavers or potentially implement beaver-based restoration techniques such as small artificial dams which mimic beaver activity on appropriate sites. If beaver could establish, or if we could design appropriate beaver-based restoration strategies, we could potentially reap the flood attenuation, water storage, carbon sequestration, and numerous habitat benefits historically provided by beaver activities on these upland sites, which would be distant from potential conflicts with human infrastructure. And I'll turn it back to Sean to introduce the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. All right, next up, we'll have a short presentation on timber resources from Jeff Tilley.
Thank you, Sean. Good evening. My name's Jeff Tilley. I'm the Forestry Program Manager on the Green Mountain and Finger Lakes National Forests. I'm also a silviculturist. I'm sitting in tonight for James Donahue. He's the district silviculturist on the Rochester Ranger District. And James has been responsible for inventorying the forests and the Telephone Gap project, and making recommendations on how to manage those forests to move them toward our forest plan desired future conditions. So I'll try to do his presentation justice. So inventorying the forest and timber resources has been a multi-year effort. It's involved reviewing archival and remote sensing data, conducting walkthrough observations, and collecting data and analyzing data from the field. The inventory also included a review of the history of the project area, including past management and timber sales. The most recent of which was the Baker Brook timber sale, which was harvested between 1996 and 2000. So the analysis indicates that around 2/3 of the national forest land in the project area would be classified as capable, available, and suitable of being managed for timber production as defined in the forest plan. Most of the inventory work that was done has occurred over the past 3 years. There's been contractors and crews measuring tree species, density, and size on hundreds of plots across more than half the project area. And what we've learned is that, generally speaking, the age and composition of forests in most of the project area is similar to that in the rest of the national forest. Like much of the rest of the national forest, as Suzanne has described, the forests are generally dominated by northern hardwoods and are largely even-aged forests, having originated after agricultural abandonment or other disturbance in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The conditions are generally more homogeneous and less diverse than that would have existed before European settlement. And it's also estimated that a little more than 85% of lands suitable for timber management have reached maturity from a timber production silvicultural standpoint. Also, 2/3 of the forested landscape is composed of tree species that are at a high risk of declining in volume or value between now and the next time this landscape is likely to be evaluated for management. These are generally short-lived early successional trees, species like paper birch and red maple that regenerated after agricultural abandonment, and trees that are impacted by insect and disease. So finally, nearly all stands are considered silviculturally considered fully stocked or overstocked, which means the forests are currently pretty dense, which is common in even-age stands, and leads to a prolonged period of mortality of individual trees as trees grow and need to occupy more space. Mortality is also occurring and expected to increase as a result of native and non-native insects and increased stresses due to a changing climate. So the forest plan has set goals and objectives for the age, distribution, composition, and structure of the forest, again, as Suzanne has described. And proposed management for this project would seek to move conditions toward those goals, as well as to improve the forest health conditions and build resilience to insects, disease, and changing conditions. Proposed management would also seek to provide more diverse habitat by increasing underrepresented habitat types and diversifying the age, composition, and structure of the forest. So for species composition, forest plan objectives are generally to maintain species and forest types on sites where they're best suited. In other words, sites that are naturally more suited to softwoods or hardwoods, for example, should be managed with that in mind. And within those general categories, there are objectives for specific habitat types like northern hardwood, spruce fir, or aspen birch. In the Telephone Gap project area, oak and aspen birch habitat types are underrepresented as they are on the Green Mountain National Forest as a whole and more broadly in the state of Vermont. And there's an opportunity to increase these important habitat types in this project. The analysis also shows that there are currently northern hardwoods on sites that would better support softwood or a mix of softwood and hardwood, and there's an opportunity to increase those habitats as well. And increase types such as spruce fir. As far as the age structure, the plan includes objectives for managing suitable and available lands using both even-aged and uneven-aged management. And where even-aged management is used, there are objectives to develop and maintain a balanced age distribution to provide diverse habitats, including early successional habitat, and also to maintain a sustained yield of forest products. The plan also sets a goal of managing at least 20% of suitable and available land using uneven-aged silvicultural systems, which results in stands comprised of at least 3 distinct age classes. So uneven-age management can be used to increase structural complexity of the forests, accelerate the growth of individual trees, and increase the species diversity while also contributing to that sustained yield of forest products. And then finally, the forest plan seeks to increase the abundance of biologically mature, more structurally complex forests. And the opportunity to do this in this project exists primarily on land within the project area that's not defined as suitable and available, but there's also opportunities to develop these conditions in reserves within the managed areas. Although it's worth noting that in many areas of the project, late successional forest conditions won't likely develop as they would have historically due to novel changed conditions, including novel non-native insects and diseases, most notably beech bark disease and climate change. So based on that initial review of the suitable timberlands and existing conditions, opportunities exist to harvest up to 11,000 acres. And treatments in that area could reduce the density or stocking of stands and capture value that would otherwise be lost. Additionally, a large proportion of those treatments would help to move even-age forests into more structurally complex, uneven-age conditions and create more diverse habitats, including aspen birch, oak, and spruce fir. And even-age forests could also have more diversity in age classes, including early successional habitat. Treatments could also increase the resilience of the forest in the project area to insects and disease like the emerald ash borer and beech bark disease, and help transition the forest to one that's better adapted to a future climate. Creating diversity in the forest in terms of species composition, habitat types, age, and structure is really one of our best strategies for building resilience in the forest and making sure that it's resilient to stressors and changing conditions in the future. And finally, the management associated with the project could also have benefits for the local rural economy and generate up to 24 million board feet of merchantable saw logs and contribute to a sustainable supply of forest products. So thanks, that's all I have. I'll give it back to you, Sean.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Next up, we have Jeremy Mears, who will discuss wildlife and aquatic resources.
Sean, did my presentation not come up?
I see it.
Okay, great. I'm just not seeing it on my screen.
Your volume is a little low, though.
Okay.
Hard time hearing you.
So, good evening. My name is Jeremy Mears. I am the district biologist for the Rochester and Middlebury Ranger District. I'm going to present to you tonight on wildlife and aquatic habitat, as well as sensitive, threatened, and endangered species. And I will start with our sensitive species. Protected species on the forest are split into two groups: regional forester sensitive species and federally listed species. These groupings relate to the level of concern we have about these populations. A federally listed species will not be listed on our regional forester sensitive species list, but it will receive a higher level of protection under the Endangered Species Act. RFSS species are species we are trying to prevent from becoming federally listed. Our regional forester sensitive species list contains 20 species that occur on or adjacent to the Forest Service lands of the Green Mountain National Forest. These species are included on the list because of threats to their populations and demonstrated trends of decline. Like I mentioned before, our goal with these species is making sure that we don't do anything that would move them closer to a federal listing as threatened or endangered. Of the 20 species on the RFSS list, 8 have been documented in the project area. Those that have been documented have a gold star next to the name on their slide. It is important to note that with the exception of 2 freshwater mussel species, most, if not all, could occur in the project area, and many have been documented just outside of the project area. Also, just because we have not observed a species doesn't mean we would not consider protections for that species. We also have 2 species that are federally listed in the project area. Our 2 species are both small bat species which have been impacted by white nose syndrome. On average, small bats in Vermont have declined more than 90% due to this disease since 2007. Our first species, the northern long-eared bat, is a small myotis bat species which is listed as threatened. Northern long-eared bats are found across the forest, and much of the project area is considered to be suitable habitat. The Indiana bat is also a small myotis species and is listed as endangered. These bats are found in the project area but are generally found below 1,100 feet in elevation and only within the Champlain Valley. There are opportunities to do work to enhance habitat for these species. However, we plan to focus most of our attention to review proposed projects to ensure that the species of concern are not negatively impacted by any actions we take. One notable exception is the designation and protections of lands around hibernacula. Hibernacula are the locations where bat species hibernate in winter, usually caves or abandoned mines. We currently have 1 hibernaculum which has been identified in the Telephone Gap area, and we will continue to look for more hibernacula on the landscape. Existing conditions for terrestrial habitat. This has been described by our timber and ecology staff, so I won't go too far with this and focus on a few key points. The existing condition for wildlife habitat is quite good on the National Forest System lands within the Telephone Gap project area. In general, the forest is providing quality habitat for a wide range of Vermont's wildlife species. Older northern hardwood forest is the most abundant habitat component in the project area and comprises something around 80%. As mentioned earlier, the average stand age for the project area is right about 100 years. Late successional and structurally complex forest is the component you want to dominate the landscape from a wildlife perspective. Closed canopies, which are provided by late successional forest, are important for many of Vermont's wildlife species. For example, many of our small bat species are closed canopy specialists. They are uniquely suited to living in the woods. Late successional forest provides this. Also, older mature softwood sands provide deer wintering habitats. There are many mapped and unmapped deer wintering areas throughout the project area running along the spine of the Green Mountains. The flip side of this is the low percentage of regenerating or young forest in the project area. Generally, we think of this regenerating forest type as being less than 10 years old. Young regenerating forest is also an important component for wildlife. Just like there are specialists for closed canopy forest, there are also those species that need young open areas, edges, and the resources found in successional habitats. The landscape on Forest Service land in Telephone Gap is relatively unfragmented. The spine of the Green Mountains has been identified as an important wildlife corridor. We will work with our forest staff and partners to maintain this connectivity. As for the existing condition of aquatic habitats in portion of the watershed on Forest Service lands, it's considered to be functioning properly. And for the most part, it has good water quality, quantity, and provides for the species that use them. Most of Vermont's streams and rivers were heavily impacted by past land use. The effects of this are still present across the landscape. However, areas in the telephone gap area have demonstrated recovery, and disturbances in this area have been limited in the recent past. Drainages in the project areas are split between 4 watersheds. I know Chris and Sean mentioned 3, but we also have Furnace Brook. So the 4 being the Ottaguichee and the Tweed, going to Lake Champlain, excuse me, to the Connecticut River, and East Creek and Furnace Brook, which flow to Champlain in the Hudson River Valley. Focusing on Forest Service land, headwater streams are the most abundant aquatic habitat in the project area. The older the age of the forest that surrounds a stream, the better it is for aquatic resources. Mature older forested stands like those seen in the project area provide cover for streams, which prevents warming, wood for aquatic habitat, and bank stability, which holds soils in place. There are also several ponds and reservoirs occurring in this area. Chittenden Reservoir and Lefferts Pond are dominant features on the western side of the project area. Chittenden Reservoir is a popular recreation area with some challenges in terms of water quality. The ponds in the project area have quite good water quality. 2 notable mentions are North and South Pond. These are higher elevation ponds that do not suffer from the acidification that has impacted other high elevation ponds in the region. Vernal pools are also common in the project area. We have worked with partners and staff to identify and map these features on the landscape for use in the later process of this IRP. Fish communities of flowing waters in the project area are dominated by brook trout, black-nosed ace, and slimy sculpin. Additional non-game species excuse me, include creek chub, common shiner, and tessellated darter. Sections of the Tweed and Ottaguichee River likely support sea lamprey and were historically spawning grounds for Atlantic salmon. Portions of these river systems are stocked by the state of Vermont to support a recreational fishery. We still have some challenges in our watersheds. Wood loading in streams is low across the forest. What I mean by wood loading is older trees falling into the water and creating complex habitats along and within stream and river channels. Wood in rivers and streams is a key component for aquatic species. Wood also slows water down, helping to reduce the potential impacts of flooding downstream. Luckily, much of the forest is older. When the riparian forests are allowed to reach maturity, they will supply the streams and rivers with natural wood material. There are some barriers to movement to aquatic organisms along stream and river channels, but most of those occur off Forest Service lands. Barriers to aquatic organism passage have been identified during the landscape assessment on Forest Service lands within the IRP project area and will likely be proposed as projects later in the IRP process. So as for opportunities moving forward, we have a number of opportunities to enhance both terrestrial and aquatic habitats within the IRP area. Upland openings. This is one area where we can really work with our timber shop to create habitat enhancement simultaneously with timber harvest. Historically, we've created permanent upland openings that require maintenance over the years. We know through this process of assessment that openings are rare in the project area. We also know that maintaining permanent openings is difficult given the terrain. Our intent now is to create temporary openings as part of timber harvest. This will create successional habitats that are transient on the landscape and won't require additional entries. Preservation of late successional and structurally complex forest. Preserving old forest around streams and rivers will allow aquatic resources to continue to recover. Generally speaking, the more forest that we can preserve as late successional, the more resilient our landscapes will be. This leads well into fragmentation. Reducing and preventing fragmentation. The spine of the Green Mountain National Forest, as I said before, is an important wildlife corridor. Identifying opportunities to reduce fragmentation will further enhance both aquatic and terrestrial habitats. This could range from proposing the closure or rerouting of trails to ensuring that timber harvests do not interrupt important habitat blocks. Bat hibernacula protections. These areas are sensitive to human disturbances. When they are being used by bats, documenting and protecting them is an important step to helping our bats as they deal with white nose syndrome. We also have opportunities to do stream habitat enhancements. We don't have a lot of projects in mind for this type of work. I mentioned before that streams are functioning properly for the most part, but there are a few opportunities for projects that will enhance stream habitat. Most of these drainages occur on the east side of the greens and were heavily impacted by past land use and have been left in unstable conditions. There may also be opportunities to enhance beaver habitat in riparian areas where there is a low potential for negative impacts or conflicts. And really the bulk of what we intend to do as this project is review the proposed actions as they move forward in the IRP process. This will allow us to focus our time on areas where projects will occur and protect both aquatic and terrestrial habitats. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. And I do want to address the fact that in the comments, personal comments to each other will not be tolerated any further. So if that continues, we will have to remove some folks from the meeting. Next up, we have a presentation from Mary Beth Deller on botanical resources.
Good evening. I am Mary Beth Deller, botanist with the Green Mountain and Finger Lakes National Forest. And I'm the botany program coordinator for the forest. My staff and I have been out inventorying plants at Telephone Gap for the past couple of summers. You may have met my staff out on the ground. They are Erin Marcus, Melissa Green, and Mary Beth Hanley. The botanical resource includes rare plants and non-native invasive plants. Rare plants include regional forest or sensitive species, which are rare plants for which we try to protect and enhance habitat in order to maintain viable reproducing populations. Examples of rare plants that you may know that occur in the project area are ginseng and showy lady slippers. Shown here is my absolute favorite plant on the planet, showy lady slippers. That is associated with limey wetlands. Non-native invasive plants include species that we try to prevent, contain, and eradicate so that other resources are not affected. Examples that you may be familiar with are wild chervil and garlic mustard, which is shown here. As an example of negative effects of invasive species, garlic mustard is allelopathic, meaning that it excludes chemicals into the soil that negatively affect other species such as sugar maple tree seedlings. The existing conditions for rare plants is that the Telephone Gap project area is a botanical hotspot, and we are quite excited about this. There are 45 rare or uncommon plant species that occur in the Telephone Gap IRP area. 27 are on the Regional Forest or Sensitive Species list. 18 are not, but are or were until recently tracked by the state. These 45 rare plant species are represented by 73 populations. More than half the rare species that are either aquatic or wetland species, and many of the rest occur in rich northern hardwood forests or woodland seep. Pictured here is boreal bedstraw, which occurs in a northern hardwood seepage forest. Another interesting part of the existing condition is that several stands had numerous old trees. However, all of the characteristics of what we would call a biologically mature forest have not yet been evaluated for those stands. These can be structurally more complex forests, offering botanically interesting conditions. 16 of the 73 rare plant populations are at least partly in or surrounded by areas with old trees. Pictured here is an old tree in rich northern hardwoods. Another part of the existing condition at Telephone Gap is high quality habitats. Suzanne mentioned these earlier. There are now 35 state significant communities of 17 different types that are mapped in the project area. That's a lot. State significant communities are recognized as the best examples of these communities in Vermont. The designation is based on condition, size, or abundance, and the landscape surrounding them. Why are these important to a botanist? For one thing, 26 of the 35 significant communities are home to rare plants. Pictured here, a field trip to Blue Ridge Fen, a state significant rich fen community. The existing condition for non-native invasive plants is that 20 species represented by 151 infestations have been recorded in the Telephone Gap IRP area. This is definitely not all that's out there. We don't and can't cover every square inch of ground when we inventory. The most common invasive species are non-native honeysuckles, common reed, Japanese knotweed, and wild chervil. Least common are oriental bittersweet, burning bush, and glossy buckthorn. Most infestations are along road and trail edges and along wetland edges. Very few are in habitat interiors. Pictured here is purple loosestrife, which is well established at Lefferts Pond. You may have seen it if you've been out in the project area. Why should we care about non-native invasive plants? We care because they affect other resources such as wildlife habitat, regenerating forests, and the recreation experience. Specifically, as a botanist, I care that infestations occur in the general vicinity of 18 rare plant populations and could compete with them. I care that 6 of the 35 state significant natural communities have infestations. Thankfully, these infestations are tiny except for the purple loosestrife on the southeastern shore of Lefferts Pond. And I am grateful that stands being investigated for potentially biologically mature forest, shown here, are mostly uninfested. This map, although not easy to see here, is available on our website, and it shows the botanical resource depicting the rare plants, the invasive plants, and the state significant communities. Having presented the existing condition for the botanical resource, now I'll talk about the gap between the existing condition and the desired future condition, and I'll list the opportunities. For rare plants, the good news is that very few concerns were reported. The forest plan goal and objective is for all rare species known to occur in the forest to have viable and sustainable populations. So the primary opportunity is to conserve the habitats where these rare species occur. This could mean several things. Not managing the vegetation in stands that are potentially biologically mature forests, or not managing vegetation in significant natural communities, or only planning management activities that would not alter the basic habitat type where rare plant species occur, or some combination of the above depending on the individual species. The good news is that out of 73 rare plant populations, only 10 occur in places where this opportunity could conflict with potential places where there could be vegetation management proposed. Continuing with the gap between existing conditions and the desired future condition for non-native invasive plants, the forest plan goal and objective is for the existing infestations to be contained, eradicated, contained or eradicated, and new ones to be prevented. The opportunities are to prevent new infestations and the spread of existing infestations by following the Eastern region's best management practices posted online in the development of project mitigations. Second, we'd like to treat non-native invasive plants near state significant natural communities, which are places where we have old trees and rare plant populations. In other words, the resources we want to protect. And finally, we'd like to treat the remaining infestations. Pictured here is glossy buckthorn, one of the less common invasive plants at Telephone Gap. One way that you can get involved with either the botanical resource or any other living resource at Telephone Gap is to join the BioBlitz. If you're not familiar with it, a BioBlitz is a detailed study of biodiversity in a specific location or over a specified period of time, bringing experts and volunteers together to collect data. Our BioBlitz is unusual in that instead of being an in-person gathering over a 24-hour period, it is virtual via iNaturalist, and it started in May of 2020 and will go until September 30th, 2021. We originally moved to that format in response to concerns about COVID-19, but we love that it allowed folks to report observations year-round in all seasons. The observations gathered will help us understand the biodiversity of the area. To give you a sense of what a BioBlitz can accomplish, to date, 3,006 observations have been reported of 875 species by 172 people. We are absolutely thrilled with these results. If you're interested in joining the BioBlitz, all the instructions for participating are on our website. For more information about the botanical resource, you can contact me at mary.deller@usda.gov. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary Beth. Next, we'll have a presentation from John McCann, who will discuss soils and wetland resources.
Good evening. Thanks, Sean. As Sean said, I'll be chatting with you briefly about soils and wetlands tonight. And I'm going to turn my camera off while I go through the presentation so you're not distracted by my moving body up here. So as we talk about what managing these sorts of resources means, I would just want to let you know what it means for me. I think about learning, conserving, and restoring when it comes to soils and wetlands. When I think of learning, inventory is finding out what's there, assessment is trying to describe what condition it's in, and monitoring is taking a look at how that condition changes over time. Conserving is finding ways to use those resources that are provided by the landscape while minimizing degradation and ensuring we can use that resource sustainably into the future. And then restoring is finding ways to reverse landscape degradation from past impacts. So what are soils and why are they important? When we think of the soil resource, it includes the solids, liquids, and gases on the land surface throughout the project area. So it consists of the horizons that, unlike the underlying parent material, have been altered by the interactions of climate, relief, and living organisms over time. And soil provides a number of ecosystem services that include regulating nutrients and water cycles, regulating greenhouse gases, supporting biodiversity, degrading waste and detoxifying materials, physically supporting roads and trails, and also playing an important part in our cultural heritage. So what does our forest plan say about soils? We want to maintain or restore the natural ecological functions of the soil, and we want to minimize the adverse impacts on soils from management activities and restore soil processes and functions on degraded soils. So looking at the project area, what are our conditions? Our soils are generally in good condition. We have some examples of localized erosion or compaction or alteration of nutrient and water cycling, generally related to past land uses or some ongoing land uses as well, including legacy roads. That's something we've been trying to pay attention to. High elevation impacts from atmospheric deposition of acidifying materials, things like sulfates, nitrates, things like that. Some localized impacts from earthworms are potentially occurring within the area. And then we also have sensitive soils mapped throughout the area. Just as an example of what a legacy road is, this is a photo that I took in the project area of an old logging road. And you've probably seen examples like this all around the forest. And when we think about soil function, there may be some compaction there. There may be some altered biological activity underneath the soil. And there's probably also some changes to the hydrologic cycling. And just to kind of show that, I kind of sketched in a line here that shows the way the slope moves across from right to left, where water at one point would have been able to flow freely across that road, but with the road cut and a little bit of berm on the left, the water might move across the landscape a little differently, changing our hydrologic regime and changing the way the soils are supported by that hydrology. And this is just a quick example of some of our sensitive soils in the area. You don't have to digest this entire map, and if the colors are hard to see, I apologize for that. But what you want to get a sense of here is that we have a big mix of poorly drained soils, steep slopes, shallow soils, soils that are really susceptible to erosion, things like that, which are all potentially impacted by ground disturbing activities. And we need to keep that in mind as we consider proposed actions in the area. So looking forward towards management, in terms of learning, getting a better sense of that atmospheric deposition and the impacts on our higher elevation soils and plant communities, getting a better sense of earthworm location and impacts to our soils, and then monitoring the effectiveness of conservation and restoration practices. In terms of conserving, we will look at protective measures for any ongoing or future approved ground disturbing activities. And thinking of restoration, one of the things we want to consider is addressing the impacts of those legacy roads, and then also potentially relocating ongoing uses away from sensitive soils if possible. So moving on to wetlands. So again, what are they and why are they important? Wetlands are the portions of the landscape where water is present at or near the ground surface. And when I say near, it could be just above or just below, but at or near the ground surface long enough or frequently enough to result in soil functions and plant communities that are specific to or adapted to those particularly wet conditions. And again, wetlands provide a number of ecosystem services. They can represent diversity hotspots for plants and animals. Obviously, when the water is present, it serves as drinking water sources for wildlife. They can serve as critical breeding locations for some species. They can be really effective at slowing down runoff, which can limit flash flooding, but also support base flows during drier periods of the year. And then wetlands also help filter out a wide range of suspended and dissolved materials from water before it heads downstream. And what does our forest plan say about it? We've got a number of things. We want to maintain our acres of wetlands primarily through natural processes. We want to maintain or restore our wetlands and associated habitats. And then we want to minimize adverse impacts on wetlands and associated habitats from management activities. We want to meet or exceed state water quality standards, including biotic standards, and then restore and improve wetland and associated resources. So what's the condition out there? We just taking a look at where they're mapped. There are hundreds of individual wetlands mapped out on this project area, and they range from a few hundred square feet to hundreds of acres. However, we know we have unmapped wetlands as well. It's been difficult over time to ensure that especially the smaller wetlands and things like vernal pools get mapped accurately. We have a long history of land use impacts. Suzanne and Jeremy mentioned a number of those, so I don't need to go into that too much. We obviously have climate stressors, things like changing temperatures and changing precipitation patterns can stress our wetlands. And then as Mary Beth mentioned, we have invasive plants as well. So thinking about how legacy land use impacts can impact wetlands, this is that same forest road I showed you earlier, and what I didn't show you was that just off the edge of the image there was a vernal pool. So as we think about how the water moves across that landscape, and some of it may get captured and diverted by that road, that may change how much water gets into that pool and how much water can persist there over time. Fortunately, on this road, we don't have so much water getting captured that there's erosion and loss of sediment, but that's something that can happen in extreme cases. And this is just a quick example of what the distribution of wetlands across part of the project area looks like. You can see we have wetlands surrounding some large bodies of water. We have wetlands that show up in series along stream systems. We also have wetlands that are kind of out by themselves in the middle of nowhere. And again, we know that there are smaller wetlands out on the landscape that aren't mapped as well. So looking forward towards management possibilities in terms of learning, the Blue Ridge Fen, as Suzanne touched on, could be an indicator for regional changes to wetland habitats. We could definitely serve or be served by improved wetland mapping throughout the area. Think of conservation similar to soils, protective measures for ongoing or future approved ground disturbing activities, and thinking about restoration, addressing, again, the impacts of legacy roads, potentially relocating ongoing uses away from wetlands if possible, reintroducing some missing ecological components. Again, as Suzanne and Jeremy mentioned, some of the beaver influence that we may be missing on that habitat, and then management of wetland plant communities. And that could either be working towards treating our non-native invasive plants or trying to reintroduce some plant communities that may be missing from our landscape. And that's it for me, and I'll hand it back over to Sean. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, next we'll have a presentation on recreation resources from Holly Knox.
Hi everyone, it is nice to see so many familiar names. I'm Holly Knox, I'm the Recreation Program Manager, and I'll be discussing recreation and visual resources this evening. Sorry, I'm trying to share my screen. There has to be one in the crowd.
Okay, looks good.
Thank you. Before we talk about possibilities, I really want to provide a context of what opportunities are currently within the project area. So you can see here the existing recreation resources. We have about 140 miles of National Forest System trail. We have 7 developed recreation sites, being the Tucker Johnson Shelter, the Lefferts Pond Day Use Area, and 4 trailheads. Those are the New Boston Trailhead in Chittenden, the Michigan Brook Winter Trailhead near the Chittenden-Pittsfield town line, that's off of Forest Road 35 or Upper Michigan. And then we have the Thundering Falls and Sherburne Trailheads in Killington. We also have some known special use permits and some existing requests that are out there. So requests for a hut at the South Pond parcel that is to become National Forest System land. We have ongoing outfitting and guiding permits at Deer Leap, and then we have some other requests. And then there's also other activities that are always happening in the project area. Those are dispersed camping, climbing, shooting. We're definitely aware of some unauthorized trails that have been constructed out there. And we have the White River, which is an eligible recreation river as part of the Wild, Scenic, and Recreational River System. All right, so the recreation meeting on July 22nd, we'll delve into these in more detail, but I wanted to provide a brief overview of some potential recreation activities. Before I do, I definitely want to set the stage that when we weigh these opportunities, it's important that we seek that balance between managing recreation and the public desires and managing for the natural resources that have just been talked about so far in this meeting, and to ensure that any potential new activities are sustainable. I also really want to reiterate what Chris said at the beginning of this meeting, and that's that the activities that I'm about to talk about are potential, and public involvement is really going to help to guide what moves forward. So talking about trails first and the potential activities, we are looking to identify a Belmont route to connect the segments that were approved in the Robinson Integrated Resource Project. And that Belmont segment was from the Rochester Ranger District to the Upper Michigan Road. And we want to connect those to the Sherburne trails. So that would include likely relocating and changing the managed use of the existing Darning Needle Trail. That trail is currently managed for snowmobiles, but it's been closed for over 15 years, primarily due to some bridge washouts that we would want to relocate around and try to avoid having that costly bridge infrastructure. I should back up too and just say, for those who aren't familiar with it, the Belmont is a long distance trail. Its goal is to create about a 485-mile long mountain bike trail from Massachusetts to Canada, and that would include about 45 huts along the way. So that system is hoping to link probably around 25 to 30 communities via new and existing trails. We also want to construct a new VAST trail segment. VAST, or the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers, is our snowmobile partner. So we want to connect the Round Robin Trail with the Old Turnpike Road to reduce the current road ride that's happening on Wildcat Road in the Chittenden area. We will likely be needing to consider proposals for a connecting ATV trail designation in the pending Quimby Mountain and No Town acquisitions. That is where VASA currently has a trail system that connects off of National Forest System land. And sorry, VASA is the Vermont ATV Sportsmen's Association. We are looking to complete probably about a half-mile of Catamount Trail relocations that will help improve drainage and the user experience, and those are mostly close to Route 4. We also are considering decommissioning 2 trails. The first is the Blue Ridge Trail, and that would be due to moose and bat concerns, including the fact that the Blue Ridge Cave hibernaculum is seeing some snowmobile visitation. And the 1,000-acre trail, which has had significant washouts since Tropical Storm Irene, so it's been closed for over a decade. We want to explore potential connectivity if it is continuing to move forward. This is between existing trail networks on the National Forest and the Killington Pico resorts. That would be to follow up on conversations that have been happening between our partners and resort staff. Moving on to the middle column and the develop recreation activities. We are very interested in developing and or expanding partners in the Chittenden Reservoir area. We've talked in the past about a Friends of Chittenden Reservoir group, or we potentially could expand our partnership with Vermont Adaptive. And I should say that's not part of the NEPA analysis, but I had to put in a plug that we're looking for people interested in that. So we want to explore options to address waste management at the dispersed camping sites that are located around the reservoir. And we are very interested in hearing how the public would like to see those sites managed. There's no clear answer on what's best here, and we are considering a couple of options, so I'll go through those. So for those dispersed sites, we're talking about potential to designate a formal campground. That would enable some sites to be on reservation, others would be first come, first serve. And that's because we've heard from the public that it's frustrating to try to rush out there to get your favorite site. We could add a camping fee that would enable us to make improvements, including making improvements for waste management. We could also develop more accessible sites and consider them primitive camping areas or concentrated use areas. Those are managed for overnight use, but they have minimal improvements. So it would be designated, but it would appear similar to how it does now. Or we could keep these sites as is. We struggle a bit with the fact that a lot of the public doesn't know that they can legally camp out there. So it's a bit of a hidden gem, but users and volunteers tend to self-manage and remove a lot of the trash because of this. We will consider the application I mentioned earlier to manage a hut on the South Pond parcel. We will explore a partner request for additional snowmobile parking. And we hope to improve management of the Deer Leap site by developing a resource protection plan. That would help us address wayfinding issues, signage issues. It would help us protect prehistoric resources as well as the private property rights that are around there. And it would help us look at potential capacity concerns. In regards to dispersed recreation, we have the potential to explore new backcountry skiing and boarding opportunities. The public has expressed particular interest in the South Pond acquisition area. That's similar to the activities happening at Brandon Gap. We will look at managing use of the Upper Michigan dispersed site. So if you are familiar with the site known as the picnic table or the Morrill Brook site, we're hoping to boulder off some of those redundant or unnecessary access points to address erosion and a lot of the motorized vehicle use at those sites. We will want to close and rehabilitate some of those unauthorized trails. And we will monitor and consider adaptive management of the Killington pit following the recent barrier installation. So it's our desire there to reduce the amount of garbage and waste, but also understand the potential lead impacts on the soil and water resources. This map is available online. I just put it here in case there were questions I need to go back to reference, but those are where our activities are. I also want to talk about visuals. We want to maintain or improve visuals throughout the project area. And so what I'm highlighting on these slides are some of the key observation points, and I'm very interested in hearing if we've missed any. So this will be in that landscape assessment document, and you can review them and see if you thought that I missed any. That's it from me, Sean.
All right, thanks, Holly. So next up, we will have a short presentation on, pull up the slides here. So our forest engineer, Dave Donahue, was not available tonight to present his section of the landscape assessment. So I will step in and run through his slides here quick. With the caveat that I am not an engineer or a roads expert. So hopefully if we have questions later, someone on our staff here will be able to answer them. So initially, so this table just shows the number of roads and the amount of miles under Forest Service jurisdiction within the project area. 12.3 total miles of road in the varying maintenance levels, as you can see there on the table. As I mentioned, these are Forest Service jurisdiction roads. These don't include the town roads that might cross through on Forest Service land in the project area. So the existing conditions, inventory showed that there are 4 bridges and 5 major culverts with a cross section of area greater than 36 square feet. 2 of the major culverts on Furnace Brook Road are barriers to aquatic organism passage. 3 major culverts on Michigan and Carroll Brook roads are not barriers to aquatic organism passage. All roads meet the required maintenance for their assigned maintenance level. And the desired future condition for the transportation system in the project area is a minimum road system providing access for forest management activities, recreational opportunities, and utilization of forest resources. The gap between the existing and desired future condition primarily related to funding allocations. And real quick, the initial possible activity list, we could potentially install gates on Forest Road 35 and 394. As I mentioned before, there are maps on the project website to see exactly where those are proposed, or not proposed at this point, where potentially they may go. And to replace the 2 major culverts on FR 57 with the aquatic organism passage structure to allow for fish and other aquatic organisms to be able to move freely through the area. There are some road improvements or reconstruction highlighted, mainly on Forest Road 394, which needs a little realignment. I believe that's the one that's right near a creek, and there's a steep side and it's starting to sort of slough into there, so we need to kind of move that further away from the creek. There will need to be some upgrade to some of the timber haul roads and recreation site and trailhead parking. Okay, like I said, that was just a brief update on the roads. In a second, we'll bring up where I left off. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Bear with me. Okay. And as I mentioned before, much more detail can be found on the project website in the landscape assessment and the associated maps. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of our presentation here, and we'll shortly move on to answer some questions. But I do want to point out what our next steps are after tonight. As we mentioned, this is just sort of the kickoff to the collaboration phase. So after tonight, we'll follow up with interested parties. We have scheduled a series of resource-focused virtual meetings and also in-person field trips that will occur during the rest of the summer and into the fall. More information on that here in a minute. We'll continue to conduct additional inventory throughout the summer. And over the next few months, we'll develop specific proposed activities for what we call our proposed action, which we're currently hoping to do this fall. Once we've developed the proposed action, we'll initiate our environmental analysis, or NEPA phase. This will include more public involvement and scoping. There will be 2 opportunities to submit comments on the project. The first will be during the scoping period, as I mentioned, and then also we will have a comment period to review the environmental assessment. Our goal is to complete the analysis and make a decision by fall of next year. And after that, we would begin implementation of projects within the environmental assessment starting in 2023. Projects could continue to be implemented for 7 to 10 years. mention the resource-specific follow-up virtual meetings and field trips. These are meetings we were hoping to have after this one to sort of foster, smaller scale discussions with smaller groups, that are really interested on certain resource topics, especially once you've had time to review the landscape assessment and maps. For now, we have 4 groups that we're looking to have, and we've scheduled 3 of them so far. One is still to be decided here soon. So for each meeting, the first date and time will be the date and time for the virtual meeting, which will be another Teams meeting. The second date there will be the date of the field trip. Locations for field trips will be determined based on interest and some feedback from folks on what they want to see. So in the chat function, we will share a form for you to click on that form, go in, you can indicate your interest on attending any of these meetings. If you do that and provide your contact information, we will put you on a mailing list for these follow-up meetings and then send you details on how to join these in the coming days. And keep in mind that signing up for interest in those follow-up meetings doesn't commit you to anything. It just adds you to the mailing list, and then once you get the details, you can decide from there whether you still want to move forward with attending. And our meetings aren't the only opportunity to contact us. As you can see, my contact, I'm the project leader. I'm the main point of contact for the meeting or for the project as a whole. But we do have a list of specialists on the ID team, interdisciplinary team on the project website. So if you have a specific question, say related to wildlife or botany, you can go to that list and find the contact information for who you would ask for those, and then go from there. But yeah, but I'm also always available. Just please be aware that during the summer, especially, we have folks out in the field working. Also, people are taking vacation, so you might not get an immediate response to an email or a phone call. So please be patient. Like I said, we'll be developing more, more actions, more input over the next few months. So there will be opportunities for that engagement. Okay, and with that, I'll stop sharing for a second. And I believe Chris has indicated he wanted to come on again with some more remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I want to thank all the presenters. They put a lot of time and effort into developing their presentations tonight, and into producing that landscape assessment. And they're also going to put a lot of effort into the planning of those resource-specific meetings and field trips. So take a moment before it goes off the screen again to fill in that field trip sign-up form for you. I do have to say that I think we're going to struggle to answer some of the questions that are in the chat tonight, because many of them are not questions, they're comments. And many of them are things that we can't answer at this particular moment in time. There was a comment recently that talked about how can we protect our forests from these plans. We don't have plans yet. There is no proposed action yet to comment on. And there was another comment very recently that asked about where is the climate assessment? When will you be presenting the climate assessment? Well, we won't produce a climate assessment or something related to climate until we actually have a proposed action that we can run that assessment on. And we won't have that for several 3, 4, 5 months from now to do. So I've struggled a little bit throughout the presentation tonight because I really wanted to listen to the resource specialist presentations, and the chat has been so busy. I've been trying to read the chat. I ended up missing big hunks of the resource specialist presentations. And I have to imagine that the folks that were actively working in the chat were also not completely paying attention to the presentations. And I think that's unfortunate because I think you probably missed out on some things. I know you did because I saw some comments in the chat that were answered in the resource presentations that I listened to tonight. So we're going to turn it over to question and answer in a minute, but I just want you to know that we will not be able to answer all of the questions that were posted in the chat tonight, even the ones that are actual questions, because there's so much in there that Jay, who was trying to filter the questions out, was having a hard time keeping up. So we will look at it all. I will say that, you know, as we move forward in this project, all those scientific articles that were posted and links to science in there, we will look at all of that. Because all of our decisions, when we make decisions on the National Forest, are based on the best available science, reputable science that is out there, that is current. It doesn't matter necessarily that the forest plan was signed in 2006. The science that we'll be using to make the decision today or next year when we make this decision will be the best available current science. So we will look at all, and thank you to the folks that I'm not criticizing the public. I'm responding to what I'm seeing going on in the chat, and it's still going on in the chat. Some of these questions were posted in the first 2 or 3 posts in the chat, and they're being posted over and over again, which is making it very hard to follow. But we will use that best available science when we make that decision. And I thank the folks that posted scientific articles in there. I appreciate it very much. And Sean or Jay, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I didn't have anything else as far as presentation-wise. So I guess we can move on to the questions. We have had our environmental coordinator, Jay Strand, has been following the chat and has hopefully picked through the questions. So I will turn it over to him now to sort of begin that process.
Thank you, Sean. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jay Strand. I am the Green Mountain National Forest Forest Planner and Environmental Coordinator. I'm not specifically on the interdisciplinary team for this Telephone Gap Integrated Resource Project. I'm just in an assistant capacity for Sean and the other team members for the project. So one of the things I'm going to assist with is right now, I'm going to read through these chat questions as best I can, filtered down into the ones that are specific to the presentation that was provided by specialist and Sean on the process of what we're conducting out on the ground with this project. But before I do so, just there's 3 things that I wanted to mention that might cover quite a few of the comments that appeared in the chat. A lot of them, as Chris already mentioned, are comments and input and your individual perspectives on what the Forest Service should be doing on this particular section of the National Forest. And so those comments will be captured, of course, they're recorded here in the chat. And we'll do our best to filter through those and summarize them and even potentially put some responses to them and get them back out to everybody to look at them. But we simply can't do that now for obvious reasons. There's just so many, and a lot of information has been provided there for us to digest. So thank you for those. But a lot of the comments had to do with carbon management, carbon sequestration, storage, and greenhouse gas emissions, and how this all relates to climate change. And so I just wanted to say up front that there has not been a carbon, like Chris said, there hasn't been a carbon assessment done specifically for the Telephone Gap project area, but there has been a baseline carbon assessment completed for the entire Green Mountain National Forest land base. And that will be posted on our web project website for those of you who may be interested in seeing that. And it provides an assessment, just like the title would suggest, a baseline carbon assessment of what the existing carbon storage of the forest that exists today on the Green Mountain National Forest. I think it's probably 3 or 4 years old now, so it's not completely up to date, but it's pretty recent. So that should help answer some of people's questions or concerns that came up in the chat. But as far as what this project will do to dive deeper into the carbon management issue, which seems to be an issue of concern for a lot of folks participating and listening in tonight, is that the team working on this project as we go through the summer will first of all incorporate climate change stressors on the landscape into each individual resource area, and look at how those stressors may be inhibiting or affecting our ability to manage that particular resource according to our forest plan goals and objectives and desired future conditions. And so we will do our best to incorporate that information based on the vulnerability assessment conducted for the northeastern part of the United States that we base this process on, and build up front into the project activities that we ultimately will move forward with in the environmental analysis process, as much upfront mitigating measures as we can to address those stressors, to enhance our ability to continue to meet those objectives on the landscape. And then on the other side, the flip side of that coin is, so what do our management activities, what are the effects on the actual carbon management, storage, and sequestration capacity of the forest within the project area? And that'll be addressed, as Chris mentioned, in the actual environmental assessment analysis. And so, I don't mean to be putting everybody off on that one, but you're just going to have to wait until that information is available for you to look at and review, and you will have an opportunity to comment on that specifically as well. And as far as the environmental assessment is concerned, I saw a few questions in the chat on why we are not doing an environmental impact statement versus an environmental assessment. The purpose of an environmental assessment is to determine whether there is a significant effect to any of the resources from the management activities that we'll move forward with in the analysis process. If that effects analysis discloses that there is likelihood of a significant impact, then that will automatically trigger an environmental impact statement. We don't come right out of the gate to do an environmental impact statement when we don't think or we're uncertain if there is a significant impact. That's the whole purpose of an environmental assessment. So that is the reason why we're doing an environmental assessment. It doesn't mean the impacts or the effects will be cursory or more shallow than an environmental impact statement, but that environmental assessment will be the basis for Chris Matrick as the responsible official for the project to determine whether significant impacts may be or are occurring, and that would automatically trigger an environmental impact statement. And the last thing I just wanted to mention is there were a few questions about the forest plan and the age and the new science that has emerged since 2006. And as Chris has already mentioned in his comments that he just made, that just because the forest plan was completed in 2006 and was based on the science at that time, doesn't mean that the environmental assessment and the analysis process that we'll use is going to be based on that old science. We will use the best available current peer-reviewed scientific information to conduct and disclose our effects. That also will be available for the public to review and comment on when the environmental assessment is complete. The forest plan is entering its 15 year of implementation this year, 2021. And regulations state that forest plans should be revised every 15 years. But that is subject to available funding, and funding is not available for all national forests who have forest plans of this age or older to actually initiate the revision process. So right now, all I can say is that available funding is not currently allocated to us to initiate a forest plan revision here on the Green Mountain National Forest specifically. And the tentative schedule right now for us to initiate that process is right now, and it's not set in stone, is around 2027. It doesn't mean we won't be collecting information and doing a need for change and conducting assessments of existing conditions and looking at some of the tentative issues that are currently occurring across the landscape earlier. But right now, that's what we're looking at, around 2027. So probably in a few years, 2 or 3 years from now, we'll start to really hone in and start to collect the information needed to trigger that process. And it doesn't mean it can't start even earlier than that. That's just the tentative schedule right now. I just wanted to make that clear to everybody who was asking that question. So right now, I'm just going to try and do the best I can to wade down through some of these questions that are specific to the presentation that some of our specialists and or Sean or Chris can answer for you. Because the true intent here of this meeting tonight was to share where we were at with this project, what it's about, the information we've collected to date, and provide you enough information for you to begin providing your feedback and input to us on how we can do further work, investigation, field inventory to finalize the proposed activities to trigger and initiate the environmental analysis with a formal proposed action later this fall. So the first question I have here is does the selective harvest of the timber plan prioritize leaving old growth trees standing? When I see timber plan, I'm assuming this plan specific to the Telephone Gap project moving forward in the assessment. So I'm gonna hand this off to our timber program leader, Jeff Tilley. If you want to take it, Jeff.
Sure. It's a little tough. I'm not sure what's meant by the term selective harvest. I'm guessing that would be like a uneven age or like a single tree selection type harvest. And so, I guess the short answer is yes. We often do when we're doing uneven age, multiple age management, and even when we're doing an even age management, we're looking to preserve the diversity, which includes the age diversity. So we're leaving older, like we call them legacy trees or clumps of legacy trees on the landscape as part of that age class representation, and to preserve the mycorrhizae that are associated with those root systems, and and all the ecological benefits that those older trees offer. So with a single tree selection type uneven age prescription, we're trying to keep trees on the landscape in all age classes and size classes and really create like a multi-layered canopy. But even when we're doing even age management, where we're more aggressively trying to establish a new cohort of trees, regenerate a stand, we're still looking for opportunities to leave trees that have like a value based on their age, or for wildlife habitat, for cavities, for snags, for seed source, and all those other benefits.
Thank you, Jeff. The next question here is, how much of the total acreage is within the Green Mountain National Forest designation acquisition area? I'm assuming that means specific to the proclamation boundary, which is the area that's been designated where the federal government can acquire land to add to the national forest. And so the answer to this question is the entire project area is within the proclamation boundary. Of the 70 2,000 or so acres within the project area. About 33,000 of those acres are National Forest System lands. So I hope that answers that question okay. The next question is, how many acres are potentially planned to be clear cut? I can take that one very quickly. We don't know. We haven't made any decisions about what harvest treatments are going to be proposed within the project area to meet goals and objectives specific to composition and age class distribution of our forest habitat types. So that has yet to be determined. And your input can help us determine that throughout the summer. Chris, this one I think is for you. Someone was in the Granville area a couple months ago and looked up southwest and saw the very large patch cut high up on the ridgeline. And someone said, well, that's Green Mountain National Forest lands. Why? The question is, why cut so much on the ridgeline? And is that likely to happen with this project?
Yeah, I'm not sure, not knowing exactly what was being viewed from that location, it's hard to say. We do not cut high on the ridgeline. It is, we do have some elevational restrictions, and just for forest type reasons in our management areas too, typically the ridgelines are often in a different management area. So without any additional information, it would be hard to say, what they were viewing and if it was indeed national forest. There are some private lands that are intermixed with the national forest that can get harvested in different fashions. So we typically do not harvest on the ridgeline, and I would anticipate there would be, I hate to say no, but very little that you would see high on the ridgeline as part of this project, because I know a lot of those areas are very steep slopes that have that kind of old forest characteristic in them because they have not been harvested for so many years due to the slope.
Thank you. Chris, the next question is, how can we convince you to not clear cut at all? And I can take that question. The answer to that is you can provide your specific input and concern relative to any potential clear cutting that could occur within the project area. That input is best it is best heard, and our ability to respond to it if there's specificity associated with that concern about a particular area, or if it's just all across the area, it would be helpful to know that. So those are the kinds of comments that we need further specificity for, and that's what the entire remainder of the summer into the fall is designed for us to learn from you. So I would encourage you who have similar concerns to be engaged, especially in the virtual meeting and field trip associated with the timber management portion of the project. Here's a question for Jeff Tilley, perhaps Suzanne Gifford, our ecologist. I'm concerned about early successional habitat, and if you are planning to do enough to create enough to help balance the age class structure of the forest, since most of it is reaching maturity. So I guess Jeff can start and Suzanne can chime in if he misses something important.
Yeah, as far as the concern about the amount of early successional habitat. So, I mean, when we do the, so as we move through and start looking at developing a proposed action, we'll be looking at those at what the best available science indicates is the kind of target acreages for age classes, and that's informed by all the latest research, including the Vermont Conservation Design, which is an ecological assessment of Vermont's forests, an ecological condition, which which puts a lot of value on both, or a need to have more old forest as well as young forest. So creation of early successional habitat will be a priority, but in the end, it's also going to be limited on by all the other resources that we're trying to balance out there, protecting archaeological resources, making sure we have habitat connectivity for interior wildlife, wildlife that uses interior forest habitats, maintaining the integrity of the hydrology and the visuals, so that we're not creating eyesores and that sort of thing. So there's always limiting factors, but until it's hard to speak to until we actually start put pen to paper and or so to speak, and do that analysis and come up with a proposal, and then we can talk. It'd be easier to talk specifics.
Thank you. This next question is, when you say desired future condition, exactly who determined what was being desired in the future? And the rest of the question is, how long ago was that desired future condition determined, and when do we get to revisit those past outdated designations and revise the desired future condition in light of the climate emergency and the need to practice proforestation to protect biodiversity in the climate? It's a mouthful, and I didn't want to try to get into too much of the proforestation and no harvesting perspective on any public lands to preserve all carbon stored on the existing forested stands on the national forest. But it is worth mentioning right now that the desired future condition in the forest plan was developed over 3 or 4 years of robust public collaboration and involvement with a full suite of interdisciplinary team resource specialists to develop across the landscape 17 management areas that are allocated within the national forest to manage the resources within those areas to try and reach goals and objectives and desired conditions on the landscape. And they're different depending on what management area you're looking at. And yes, they were developed 15 years ago, but the desired conditions that we are achieving or striving to achieve on the landscape are the same. But it doesn't mean that we don't consider emerging science to help us modify our approach to reach those objectives on the landscape through our management activities. And so I'm going to leave it at that. But I did want to say that there are so many comments and concerns relative to this issue, proforestation, which is basically no harvesting of trees on public lands, or in this case, public lands, also on any lands where there's old growth existing to retain those stands for their storage capacity values. We would like to put it out there for folks to meet with us either virtually and or in the field to discuss this specific issue. It wasn't one of the 4 topics or groups of topics that Sean shared at the end of his presentation, but based on the interest that we're seeing here in the chat, it is something that we will consider doing. So you should be seeing something, or maybe seeing something regarding that opportunity to participate and learn more, and for us to learn more from you regarding this particular issue. Jeff, I'm gonna put this one on you, Jeff Tilley. So if these forests are northern hardwood with a cutoff of 120 years and they are something like 80 years old now, does that mean you have an incentive to manage or clear cut them now so they never reach that designation?
No. I mean, it doesn't really create an incentive one way or the other. So within the project area, we have suitable areas that are defined as suitable and available for timber harvest and areas that are not. And then within those areas managed for suitable and that are designated suitable and available, we're using both even-aged and uneven-aged timber harvest methods. Those age categorizations don't really apply to the uneven age because those are more structured. Those are being managed for a variety of age classes, at least 3 by definition. And often many more. But so when we're looking at those age classes, that applies specifically to areas being managed using even-aged forestry within the suitable and available land, and we're trying to balance, to have a mix of age classes for the diversity of habitats on the landscape, kind of for the forest health resilience that diversity provides and the wildlife habitat it provides, but also to provide a sustainable flow of timber products and so that we manage the resource sustainably. Hopefully I answered that question. I don't know if that was getting at it.
Thank you, Jeff. I don't go away. The next one is for you too. Come back. This one's for you. I read in the landscape assessment that herbicides are to be used in conjunction with management of the forest. Is glyphosate going to be used despite the danger of allowing cancerous substances to be added to the ecosystem?
So again, I'm filling in for James, and so I don't have the detailed knowledge of, but glyphosate use would be a proposal, and we're not there yet necessarily. I'm not sure what the mention of glyphosate in the landscape assessment is. If it was mentioned as a potential tool, but I mean, we're not proposing anything at this time, and we typically herbicide use is on the national forest is limited to invasive plant treatments and things. We've done some. So yeah, so at this point we don't have anything proposed.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. This one is for me. Can you compare what happens in the Green Mountain National Forest wilderness area in terms of forest density, tree health, et cetera, with this proposal? And the answer to that is the environmental assessment, what it will do is it will disclose the effects of our proposed management activities compared to the existing condition within the project area. We won't be comparing it with what's going on with the stand conditions or the ecosystem within a wilderness. There are no wilderness designated within the project area. In fact, the closest one is quite a ways to the north of the project area. So the answer is no, we won't be. Sorry, I have to wade through a lot of these here. A lot of them are comments. So this one will be for either Suzanne Gifford or Jeremy Mears. How does harvesting habitat benefit the wildlife? In order to provide habitat, would we not be wiser to leave the habitat intact? Do we still have Jeremy here?
Yeah, we're both here. Oh, Jeremy disappeared. I guess that's me. I will answer really briefly. I'd be happy to get into this in more detail in a subsequent meeting, but in brief, we have a huge suite of wildlife that uses the forest with all completely different habitat needs. So the best thing we can do to really benefit wildlife is to have a diversity of habitat types on the forest. And sometimes that's leaving things alone. We have a lot of that, as we've mentioned, and sometimes that there are treatments we can do to help improve those habitats.
Okay, thank you.
Hey Jay, this is John McCann. I just was wondering if we could go back to that glyphosate comment, because as as Jeff said, that if we did use glyphosate, I think that'd be more in terms of non-native invasive plant treatment. And if Mary Beth Deller is still on, she may be able to touch on, what the process is for using different herbicides.
I am still on. I'm not real clear what the question is about glyphosate, but I will say that the big issue with toxicity of glyphosate has to do with the surfactants that are in the formulations. And we specifically don't allow formulations that come with surfactants already mixed in them. We only use either no surfactant at all or added surfactants that have already been rated as safe by the EPA. Does that answer the question?
It did look like there was a follow-up in the chat there. It just said, will it be used or not? That's the question. I'm hoping that's what that chat was referring to.
Oh, okay. So in terms of invasive species, I don't know the answer. We already have a decision to be able to use it anywhere on the forest. That decision was made in 2011 when we did an invasive plant control environmental assessment and had public meetings at that time. So we have the potential to use it, but there's been no decision to go ahead and use it.
Thanks, Mary Beth. And I'm going to ask somebody from the Forest Service to help read the messages that are being placed in the chat at the tail end of the chat boxes, because I can't see any follow-up questions without losing my place on where I'm at reading up above. I'm trying to work my way down there, but it's going to take a while to get there. And by then the follow-up question will be lost. So I'll just ask, just like John did, to monitor that for me and bring it to my attention. The next question is for you, John McCann. Will the project have as a goal to improve water quality?
Yeah, and that's something that's just part of the forest plan. So being that this is an action that we would potentially take underneath the forest plan as a whole, we do have that goal to meet or exceed state water quality standards. So that would hopefully be part of it if we can be successful at the things we are intending to do.
Okay, thank you. The next question is short and sweet. What wildlife species benefit from early successional habitat? Jeremy or Suzanne?
Sure, there's a long list. Deer, moose, bears, a lot of bird species. Jeremy?
Well, you pretty much hit the big ones. Moose and neotropical birds are really our big species that are going to benefit from successional habitats. But that's not all.
Okay, thank you. And that information can be provided throughout the summer if more information is needed, more specificity or a more exhaustive list. The next question is, are local tribes at the table? The answer to that is yes. All the tribes with pertinent interest in this area of Vermont, we're all invited to participate first in this meeting tonight, but we also will be actively engaging and being more proactive in finding out, what their interests and concerns and issues might be, along with other entities, organizations, agencies, towns, and individuals and organizations. But the tribes specifically will be identified for that process as well.
Hey, Jay, I can jump in with a question.
Sure.
Question was another wildlife question. A wildlife corridor has been studied and identified. Also, are they being protected? So I guess Jeremy or Suzanne.
We have information from a variety of sources. This telephone gap area does largely coincide with a high priority connectivity block identified by the state ANR. Within that, we are working actively to learn more about connectivity in corridors. We've actually teamed up with some UVM researchers to initiate a study in the coming months and years with some cutting edge techniques to look at corridors for 10 different wildlife species, and as well as considering the impacts of management. So I think we've got a lot of specificity coming on that in the near future.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. This next question is, sorry, I had it here. Does timber harvesting encourage non-native invasive species? Mary Beth, that would be a question for you.
Certainly it has the potential to, and that's why we use the best management practices for the eastern region of the United States and put mitigations based on those into the environmental assessment.
Okay, thank you, Mary Beth. This next question is regarding fragmentation. It's my understanding that Vermont is struggling with fragmentation due to development, etc. So why would we want to clear cut, create openings and young tree stands in the Green Mountain National Forest? Jeff, you still with us?
I am. And so I mean, it's so usually fragmentation is it's a wildlife concern typically, but you know, so the even age timber harvests where we would be creating gaps and openings in the canopy would be temporary openings. So it's still in a basically forested condition and regenerating, and it provides a different type of habitat, but we still work to maintain connectivity for wildlife that use interior forest blocks as well in the matrix on the landscape. But it's fundamentally different than development or conversion of forest land to non-forest uses where that, you know, that a forest habitat is being taken off the landscape entirely. But yeah, connectivity is important to consider.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. There's a second part to this question. We have a lot of private land in the state. Our forest management plans, and I'm assuming this is referring to the Telephone Gap project proposal, done in concert with taking into account the status of the rest of our landscape, or is it done in isolation? The answer is no, it's not done in isolation. Not only is the forest plan, you know, part of our primary driver for determining what we want to do on the landscape on the national forest, but we also take into consideration, just as we've already implied it a few times now, other statewide or even regional-wide planning documents to help us understand, you know, how we fit into the big picture. The National Forest fits into the big landscape picture. The Vermont Conservation Design comes to mind as one. I already mentioned the New England Vulnerability Assessment as another. So we tried to not do our planning in isolation because we do know that ecosystems and issues related to ecosystem issues that are related to ecosystems don't stop at the national forest boundary.
Hey Jay, I can jump in with another one.
Please do.
Another one for Jeff on timber harvest. The question is, do you grow more timber than you harvest? If so, how much more or less?
I guess the short answer is yes. We harvest annually considerably less timber than is grown on the forest in any given year or decade. And even on the suitable and available lands, that's true. So when you take into account non-suitable lands and wilderness areas and areas that are not considered suitable for management, it's considerably more so. But I don't have exact figures at my fingertips.
Okay, this next question is there any public opinion polling associated with these longer term plans? Again, I'm assuming this is specific to the telephone gap project. I don't think many Vermonters know about this project, and I can't imagine that given the important plant and animal species residing and migrating through this corridor that they would support timber harvesting here. The answer about the public opinion polling is no, we haven't done any public opinion polling, but we're seeking public involvement. The National Environmental Policy Act requires us, for any management activities on federal land, for the public to be involved. And that's why we're having this meeting tonight, and we'll be continuing to engage with the public throughout the summer as we get into the fall and finalize what we want to actually propose in the project area. But not only does the National Environmental Policy Act require it, it's just the right thing to do. This national forest land base does belong to the public, and we want to hear the concerns and issues, and especially hear the input specific to the activities that we're wanting to put forth before we move forward with the actual environmental assessment process.
Okay, Jay, I can take another one. So there's sort of a longer comment mentioning the benefits of early successional habitat for songbirds. The question is there any such body of work that the Forest Service is aware of? Yes, in our last IRP on the Somerset IRP, I specifically remember several studies on the benefits of early successional habitat to songbird species. And then second part of that comment is, will you be actively partnering with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife? I could pass it over to Jeremy, but they're on all the mailing lists. They were invited to representatives were invited to this meeting. We do try our best to partner with them as much as they want to be involved, but I could pass it off to Jeremy to see if he's has anything more specific.
In regards to studying songbirds as part of this IRP, no, we currently don't have any projects with the Vermont State folks, but we do partner with them on a number of projects across the Forest North and South districts. So I mean, they're always at the table when we're reviewing stuff.
Thank you, Jeremy. I got this next one. This would be for John McCann. Given illustration of the logging road impact and hydrology, what will impact of the logging roads and traffic resulting from this project look like?
Well, I guess that's tough to answer again because we haven't actually made any decisions about where roads may go. Often when we do approve timber actions, we seek to reuse as many old roads as we can so that we're not putting a new scar on the landscape. At least that's the understanding that I've got. But one of the benefits that we have is decades of understanding about the right way and the wrong way to do those sorts of roads. So when we are either reconstructing old roads or putting new roads in, there's lots of BMPs or best management practices that we can use to try to limit our impact on the landscape, and whether that's trying to minimize the amount of compaction, minimize the spread of invasive plant species, better management of water across or through those features. What we do today generally is a lot lighter on the land than what we used to do. But again, until we have kind of a real proposal about what timber treatments we may go in and do, it's hard to say exactly what that'll look like.
Thanks, John. I have another question teed up here, Sean. Would it be possible, this would be for Suzanne, would it be possible to visit the Cape Natural Research Area, the Blue Ridge Fen, and or the North Pond area sometime with a biologist to learn about these areas?
We could make that possible. Yeah, if there's a lot of interest, we could consider a field trip up there as part of this IRP engagement process. Otherwise, please be in touch and we could arrange something.
Okay, I've got another one. I'm not sure who can answer this. Maybe someone who's been around a while. Can you explain the history of the 7,500 acres acquired in 2001 that is now part of the Telephone Gap area? Are any of the candidate stands included in this acreage? I wouldn't know without a specific map of where that was. I do know, from 2001, that's, a while ago, so that's just incorporated into, the Forest Service acreage. So it was, obviously it was assessed whether, whether they did a stand exam there or not. I don't know. I'd have to look at a map of, where that parcel was, but I don't think we could get into that detail here. I don't know if anybody else had anything to add. Okay.
Yeah, I believe that would be, sounds like that would be the Stanley Tool Company lands that were acquired. It was a big hunk of land in that area. I'm sure parts of it are within the project area. I'm not 100% certain of that. But as you said, they are being treated just the same as the rest of the National Forest System lands within the project area. I have a question about land acquisition. I think Chris already answered it in the chat box, but I just wanted to make sure that we haven't missed something here. What is the status of the South Pond acquisition? Chris?
Yes, so the South Pond acquisition looks like it will move into National Forest System management later this fall or early winter. That's the timeline currently.
Thank you. This is a question that I believe came up when Holly Knox was presenting information about recreation trails. Do you evaluate how these trails impact wildlife habitat connectivity? Jeremy, would you like to speak to that?
Sorry, Jay, you broke up. Can you repeat that question?
It broke up. Okay, yes. Do you evaluate how recreation trails may impact wildlife habitat connectivity?
So in some areas we have done this. So as part of our past IRP process for Robinson, we did look at what the effects of the backcountry ski zones were for moose. So we have done that for some species, but we don't do it broadly across the forest. I mean, there's a lot of research and information available for what those impacts are.
Thank you. This question touches on carbon storage. Is there any correlation between the rate of increase in the stocking of forest products and absorption of carbon dioxide? I'm assuming stocking of forest products simply means increasing or enhancing the basal area or the stocking within forested stands. So the answer is there is a correlation, of course. The more basal area and the healthier that basal area of trees growing within a given area, the higher rate of carbon sequestration that is occurring and the higher amount of carbon storage that is occurring. The older the stands get, the sequestration begins to slow, but the carbon storage continues to increase. So the older mature stands do maximize carbon storage compared to younger stands. But part of the equation is stocking of those, of the density of trees growing within those areas at the same time. That all will be discussed and disclosed, the effects disclosed specific to this project in the carbon analysis portion of the environmental assessment.
Go ahead, John. You have your hand up.
Thanks, John. Yeah, just to touch on that, there are a number of resources that have been put out by, people smarter than I am when it comes to climate and carbon. Taking a look at National Forest System lands as a whole across the country, taking a look at our region in the Northeast specifically, and then I think you guys had mentioned earlier that we've got it even more specific down to the forest. It might be good, given the amount of interest in carbon and climate impacts, to have some of those resources linked on the project page so people can see that, what those numbers are, or what some of those where they can find some of those resources. But I do want to just mention from the soils component that, to the best of my understanding, the vast majority of our carbon stocks are in soil organic carbon. And so while the above ground stocking of forests does change, over time, based on, natural variations and potential harvest or wildfire, things like that, it's really buffered out a lot of times by the amount of soil organic carbon that's underground. And that's not the root mass, that's everything kind of outside of that in the soil itself. So that's really a big driver of where our carbon sits most of the time. So managing for healthy and productive soils is a really big driver in making sure we limit our impacts to the carbon balance.
Thanks, John. Good suggestion. This question will be for Jeff Tilley. Will the felled trees during harvesting be allowed to remain on the forest floor?
So it depends whether it's a commercial timber sale or a non-commercial silviculture operation, and we do some what we call chop and drop for silvicultural objectives, for habitat objectives, where we'll cut some trees down but leave them in place. If it's a commercial timber sale, typically only the merchantable products are removed, and we require that the top wood, the leaves and branches, and the crown of the tree essentially be left on site and remain scattered on site, and that's to ensure that's where a lot of the nutrients that are stored in the tree stem are stored. A lot of them are in the buds, fine branches, and leaves. So leaving that on site helps to retain water, prevent erosion, and it helps to cycle it helps with the nutrient cycling and the long-term productivity of those sites. So it's usually what's removed in a commercial timber sale would be logs that would be, typically go to generally local Vermont or New York, New Hampshire regional sawmills that are making dimensional products and things, and then there's some smaller diameter material that has a variety of uses, pallets, for example, pulp, etc.
Thank you, Jeff.
I have a couple from lower down if you want me to take a couple.
Sure, I got one here really quick for John McCann, though. What kind of water quality monitoring currently takes place? Is there a baseline aquatic and temperature? Is there a baseline aquatic and temperature data? Will post-project monitoring be occurring?
Yes and yes. I don't know specifically exactly what's been done on the streams that are out there. Jeremy may know better than I do, but we do partner with the state. We recently have funded an agreement with the state to have them assist us with that, and we are partnering. So it's a mixture of the water chemistry, water temperature, and macroinvertebrates to help us take a look at both baseline data, long-term trends, and pre and post-project impacts from timber and other activities as well.
Go ahead, Sean. You can take the next one.
So this one could be either for Suzanne, Jeremy, or even Mary Beth. It says, how many species have gone extinct in Vermont in the last 4 decades? If you know of any.
I can take a swing at the animal species. I mean, Mary Beth's going to be the one for the plant species, but in general, I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 36 endangered species right now and 16 state threatened species. And I don't know of any species that have been lost recently. I mean, we've seen declines in a lot of species, in particular our Myotis bat species that have been heavily impacted by white nose syndrome. But in general, the only species I know of that's been taken off a list would be the catamount. But that species really left the landscape long ago and has just been, rumored to be still existing in Vermont. But in general, there are declines in a lot of those species that are state threatened and endangered and federally listed. But in terms of actually lost, I can't really think of any that have disappeared.
And I can just add to that, Jay, that if someone wants to go on the Vermont Fish and Wildlife site on the state website, you can find a list of all of the rare species that are tracked, both plants and animals, and it will list their status, including whether they've been extirpated. I think there are very few that have gone extinct in the last few decades.
Okay, thanks. And this one, maybe Jeff can take, is reforestation of logged areas the responsibility of the National Forest Service?
Yeah, I think Chris did catch that a little further down. Yes, it is the Forest Service responsibility. And usually if we're doing a regeneration type treatment, it's really designed around what that regeneration is going to look like. For example, trying to regenerate aspen to provide habitat, for example, or to increase the percentage of aspen on the landscape, which is a species that's in decline as forests age, and there's not as much natural disturbance as there had been prior to European settlement. So yes, and typically it's natural regeneration. The sites regenerate quickly, naturally from natural seedings, and the size of the cuts, the amounts of trees that are left, and the shapes and everything are taken into account to kind of help us get the type of regeneration that we're after. There are cases where we do planting. Usually it's not because we don't think trees will grow back, but because we want to promote or make a less common habitat type like oak, which is in decline in the landscape. Is a very small percentage of the national forest, and it can be difficult to regenerate naturally. So sometimes we do some supplemental planting with oak, or if we're trying to encourage a site that would have been historically a softwood site that's currently in northern hardwoods, we might plant some native red spruce, or a non-native plantation, for example, like Norway spruce. We might try to plant native species there to hurry that restoration process along.
Thanks.
Here's a really easy one for you, Sean. How does anybody listening tonight get on the project mailing list?
Just say you want to be on the mailing list. You can put it in the chat, or email me at that contact information I gave before, and I'll add you to the project mailing list. If you got an email with the flyer already, then you're already on the list. But yeah, just email me, put it in the chat, your email address in the chat, and I can add you to the list if you're not already. And I had a quick one, I lost it, but it's basically asking, will new wilderness areas be considered, can they be considered as part of this project? Short answer to that is no. Wilderness areas are designated by Congress, and even recommending areas for wilderness, I believe, would fall under forest plan sort of revision stuff. We wouldn't be covered under anything like this.
I don't know if I'm overlapping into questions that you already asked or not, Sean, so I hope this isn't a repeat. Why is it important to have balance in the age classes of the forest?
I think I did answer that one already.
Okay, so I'm actually getting into questions that Sean already asked then.
Okay. There might be a few still out there, but we are past 9 p.m. So if you want to So respect everyone's time. Somebody did ask if the chat would be saved. The answer to that is yes, it will be saved. And we have the ability to go back through and pick out anything, and we can reach out if we and respond to any specific questions you might have. So
Hey,
with that,
Sean,
Chris, did you wanna
before we
say-
wrap, there is one question in here that I've been like sitting on, looking at it, and I don't think it's been asked. And that is, it's probably for Jeff Tilley. There's two pieces to this one. Oops, and I just moved my screen. Hold on. It was, do the logs harvested on the Green Mountain National Forest stay in Vermont, or where do they go? Do we know where they go? And do any of them go to China or to Europe? That's kind of a conglomeration of 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah, and I was just actually trying to respond to that in the chat. And one of the things I was going to do is link a publication put together by the state and the association, the National Association of State Foresters, that was basically an analysis of forest resources in the forest products industry in Vermont, and gave some numbers as to timber harvested in the state, kind of where it flows, how much of it goes overseas generally, how much goes to New Hampshire, to Quebec, to New York, and how much stays in, how much wood comes into Vermont to get processed. And I don't have those numbers at the tip of my fingers, but I can provide a link to that. I think it was from 2013, so it's not the most current, but that's the information that I have. But we don't track all the products as they as they leave the forest. So I can't give numbers specific to national forest land. I can just point to kind of broader regional trends. I can say that a lot of the majority of our timber sales are purchased by hardwood sawmills in Vermont or neighboring New Hampshire, just along the Connecticut River Valley, or by logging operators that have close relationships with those mills. I'll put that link up though.
And there's one real quick, if Eric Daniels is still on, asked me to clarify earlier who was consulted as early as 2018 to discuss this project. I think I was referring to some of the early common stand exams, which are like a timber inventory. Those are done through sometimes we contract that work out rather than do it internally. So I believe that's what I was referring to. Okay. Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think we can, if we missed anyone, we apologize. We tried to get to as many as we can. And I will be reviewing the chat and maybe trying to reach out to anyone I missed or that we may have missed tonight with any answers to your questions. So, okay, with that, I will say good night and look forward to working with you all moving forward. Thank you. Thanks, John. If you're still on. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I didn't know if there was going to be any debrief, but I see we're still recording.
Oh, is it? I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can.
Jay was the one in charge of the recording, wasn't he?
Away from
He
you.
left.
Oh.